Okay, chapter 9, looking at basically how the country was changing and growing post-War of 1812. There's peace in Europe, so now we're going to have an increase of nationalism. There's an increase of immigration that we'll look at later. The economy is changing. No more Napoleonic Wars or European wars means that a time of peace and prosperity can happen, and also people aren't distracted by what's going on overseas, and so you have more focus and more concentration on what's going on at home. There's an industrial revolution. Agricultural environment is changing, what they're producing, how much they're producing. Cotton is becoming a major commodity. There's internal improvements happening, lots of innovations. Now they can be more focused on making the U.S. better than having to deal with foreign affairs. For transportation and how that was changing, there's lots of new roads. Internal improvements is basically, at this point, it's going to be roads, canals. Later it becomes bridges, railroads. Anything that's transportation, city related will fall under internal improvements. But for new roads, transportation is going to help with this national market economy that's being developed, increasing trade and increasing interaction and business and markets. The Wilderness Road, 1795, opening wagons and stagecoaches, and taking that same idea and making more roads, better roads, clearing roads, because between towns is very non-existent, or they were maybe trails or lower quality roads, and so trying to make them better quality to make movement easier and faster, not just for people but for products as well. Because if you're going to go by land in terms of moving any products that you have from city to city, you're going to be limited to very rough roads sometimes, wagon stagecoaches, and sometimes it's going to take them a very long time. And the farther south you get, the less major roads you have between cities. It becomes more of that trail type of transportation. More people realize, though, that there's a need for political unity and economic progress, and the way to connect those and connect the nation is going to be through canals and through roads. Water transportation is becoming a big development. There had been water transportation. It's something that even since the colonial era, many towns and groups had settled along water because it was a great way to move product and have access to farther markets. For rivers, having the innovation of a steamboat was a big change, and now it has solved the problem of upriver or upstream navigation. For the steamboat, the first design, John Finch. First successful commercial design would be Robert Fulton and Robert Livingston. Fulton more of the innovator side, and Livingston was more of the politics side. They used the Claremont and go 150 miles up the Hudson in 1807. It transforms water transportation. Flatboats were great for going downstream, but not really up. Steamboats are going to be able to bring two-way traffic to rivers and create this transcontinental market by being able to navigate pretty much to wherever they wanted to if there was a waterway that was capable of that kind of mobility. Within 5 years, there were 69 steamboats, increasing the speed. They were also used for floating hotels, for gambling sites, also led to some of the first safety regulations because of numerous boiler explosions. Because water transportation now is so much more accessible, some people start looking at how could we connect some of these natural rivers and change the flow to where we really want some of this connection to happen. And so we started talking about building a canal. Governor DeWitt Clinton was one of the forerunners of that movement, and the best location they could find would be between Albany and Buffalo, New York. And so they make this the site of the Erie Canal, 40 feet wide, 4 feet deep, 363 miles long, which will lead to the Hudson connecting to New York and makes New York the commercial capital. Huge engineering feat, led to more canals being built because it was so successful. The downfall for the canal boom is going to be the fact that they weren't as profitable as people had thought. Same thing with some of the newer roads. Both of them require tolls, require charges to use them. These newer ways of transportation, they're nicer, they're more expensive, and to pay for those, people had to pay to use them, like a toll road we have now. Usually nicer roads, a little bit less crowded, and to be able to get those benefits, you have to pay a fee. Well, not everyone's going to want to pay those fees, and so there's not as much of a quick profit as people had once thought. There's Robert Fulton, Erie Canal location, and several other canals that came as part of it. So transportation, when it came to railroads, is probably one of the biggest innovations that we're going to look at, plus one of the first big businesses. They're much more versatile. They can connect beyond just port cities and canal cities. They're able to go inland, which is really important at this point because post-War of 1812 especially, and after the Louisiana Purchase, people are going to start settling farther and farther west. Well, there's not rivers and canals to connect to every location, so railroads are going to be the next best option, and they can go where the rivers cannot. They're cheap, they're quick and reliable, they're good for capacity and speed. Between the 1830 and 1850, there were about 30,000 miles built. There's, speed is relative because about 10 miles per hour, but it was lower costs. It was encouraging settlement. If the railroad hit your town, you were almost guaranteed success. They were supporting other industries with steel and coal. Anything that was used to make railroads or to help railroads run was succeeding as much as they were. Negatives, there's a lot of corruption involved with the railroad business. There's a lot of greed, a lot of quick profits, and we'll look at those throughout the next few units. Ocean transportation, trying to make that a little bit faster. They make clipper ships, which sacrifice space for speed. They end up not being quite so long-term because they're replaced by the steamships later on. And then land for the government. One of the biggest owners of government One of the largest owners of land was the federal and state governments. There's a lot of land grants they give out, a lot of preferential funding and things for especially things like railroad companies and later on for the settlement of the West. Communications are going to change as transportation is moving, people are moving. Communication needed to also find some way of updating. They are trying to overcome distance. They're expanding their markets, lots of improvements. Started express mail with riders and horses, but technology with things like telegraph are going to be a big part of it. And actually, I just noticed that there's a typo, and I'm going to fix it right now. I don't know what a telegraphy is, but a telegraph would send messages, and you could all of a sudden hear things instantly using things like Morse code. Sending short and long dashes, it would become letters and messages. As long as there was a connection to that city and they had a telegraph, you could communicate messages. Improved standard of living was another thing at the time period. There were bigger houses, better heating, lighting, indoor plumbing. If you were the lower class, you might have coal-burning stoves, which was a great advancement. First sewer systems being developed, which was great for the city, so they weren't quite so stinky. There's machine-made clothes, newspapers, magazines, just a lot of innovations all over the place. Sewing machines, just a lot of new inventions in terms of how to improve things. There's the sewing machine, which was very convenient for some of those early factory systems or seamstresses in trying to help kind of speed up and standardize the process. Agriculture is changing as well. Industrialization brought commercial and urban parts of the economy, and it's going to start to replace agriculture. Cotton is going to explode, though, in the South, and it becomes, not literally, but it becomes a new cash crop. With the Industrial Revolution, there was a huge increase in demand for cotton to help with the textiles, and a lot of the people start to talk about cotton industry and how to grow it, how to make it more profitable. It was very labor intensive to harvest cotton by hand, to separate the cotton fibers from the seeds of the plant. When Eli Whitney creates the cotton gin, it increases the production of cotton 50 times faster than what it had been, and it's a whole new revolution. It's more slaves, more land, all of that was a part of this. Cotton became more crucial to the economy. It was a driving force for slavery, and actually led to an increase in slavery, not a decrease, because now you could create or plant more product. If you're a farmer, if you have an agricultural-based livelihood, you're not going to plant too much because you're going to have to pay for everything you plant, and if you can't harvest it all, then you have wasted money and wasted product. Well, now that you can harvest more, you can plant more, so you need more people to tend to those fields year-round. There's a lot more farming innovations. People are moving west, they're taking more farms as they expand. There's laws and allowances for those who are settling in those lands, like preemption rights. Squatters, which are basically people that didn't officially buy the land before they started settling on it, but squatter rights to the land, allowing them to buy the land that they had basically claimed instead of going through an official channel to buy it first. Also having a plan to where Graduation Act 1854, giving prices of unsold lands to drop after a time period. But if you have a new claim once you buy one of these new pieces of land or you settle on one of these new pieces of land, you have to you have to plow the fields, you have to make the land ready for planting and ready for agriculture, and it's very labor intensive. Things like the iron plow with Jethro wood was very important. John Deere improving that with the steel plow, steel much more durable metal. Mechanical reaper was a great thing with Cyrus McCormick, being able to harvest instead of half an acre a day, 12 acres a day, and again, the more you can harvest, the more you can plant, so increasing those profits and increasing agriculture production overall. Another invention of Eli Whitney was interchangeable parts. It's going to become very part of the Industrial Revolution later on, the idea that you standardize parts so that you can replace them and make that better business. John Deere and the steel plow, the horse would drag the plow, it would plow through the ground, and then you can plant the seeds of whatever crop you were going to grow. Mechanical reaper, before, for harvesting, you'd have to walk around in the fields with a sickle, curved blade, and harvest it by hand. And now with the mechanical reaper, the horses, as you can see here, would pull, and the blades here would rotate, and you could basically harvest the crop, and it's much, much faster. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution, more textiles, the innovations help to quicken agricultural development, and more factories, more innovations, machinery being invented and brought over. Britain had basically had a head start, but Samuel Slater, he's kind of the father of the factory system, came over with ideas, and we'll put those to use in America and help to create the Industrial Revolution over here. Some restrictions on how much they could do, and just the output at first was kind of sometimes limited at the home. Then they start making the factories where they house everybody there and start to create the factory system. Birthplace of factories, kind of known as in Lowell, Massachusetts, with the Boston Manufacturing Company. They combine the process of spinning and weaving, raw material to finished cloth, all in one location. They wanted to create a good place to work, a reputable place to work. It's very common that they would hire young girls to work there, and they wanted to make sure that they were still women of good reputation when they left. So it was very strict living conditions for those working women. It was acceptable if you were young and single to work, but once you were married, you were expected to go home and be wife and mother. For conditions in the workplace start to deteriorate, when conditions and wages and hours become less than what people were hoping for, or more hours, less pay, bad conditions. This picture of Lowell, early looms, mechanization or technology for the factories. A lot of it centered around New England, thinking back to the colonial time periods, and we talked about how they don't have farmland, so their best option, shipbuilding was in the colonial era. Now we're looking at factory system. Okay, so when the cities were growing and becoming very rapid, time period wise and development wise, more people are settling into those cities, and they're working, and when they're off of work, there's entertainment business is going to be able to make a profit off of that. For the large cities, the four great Atlantic seaports, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Boston, were the largest, and New Orleans is going to be quickly catching up and surpassing many of those because of its focus on cotton exports. Pittsburgh was the center of iron production. Cincinnati was a big meat packing center. St. Louis for fur trade, and a lot of trade business, all that's going to dominate the cities. They also become very, like I said, very busy. There's a lot of indulgence and recreation, leisure, forms of entertainment, social drinking, sports like boxing, performing arts. Theater was a big part of this, but women were discouraged from attending. It wasn't acceptable for a woman to be in a theater. Blackface minstrel shows were a pretty common form of entertainment. Like the picture there, that's the same person before and after makeup was done. Whites would dress up as happy slaves and put on shows, kind of melodies, musicals depicting slaves who were happy with their situation in life. And it was a very popular form of entertainment, despite how completely inaccurate that it was. Okay, I'm going to finish up with this one on the next, so that's the end of part 1.